Okay, we are in Siman Kuf Chav Ches. We're up to Sid Zayin. This is the, I believe, fifth shir of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch on the halachis of Elul. So let's begin. We started to talk about yesterday about the qualities of a chazan. That was an introduction to Siv Zayin, and we were explaining yesterday. That as the Friedrich Rebbe said, that beroiv chazanim are machti. So b'chas shalom, not in this case, but maybe a little bit because it was took away from our time of learning. I don't know. Okay, but either way, the point is that that you have the sincerity is the main thing. But there are some qualities that we try to get when you're looking for a chazan. So let's take a look at Siv Zayin, and we'll see how it's spelled out, and we'll see what the Rebbe has to say about it a little bit also. Yidaktiku livchor shliach tzibur. You should be medaktik. You should be specific to choose a chazan, sheispalo slichus, when it comes to slichus, ubayamim hanoyroim, and also for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that the type of choice should be a person that contains ish, a man, shehu, that has certain qualities that we're about to say. Number one, hagun. He should be someone who is appropriate or fitting. The gadol b'Torah. And in other words, I don't have an exact definition of what that would mean, but I think it means that if someone would say, "Oh, this is an honorable person, respectable person to be a chazan," and people understand that, like that type of stature. Number two, v'gadol b'Torah. There should be someone who's well versed in Torah. Number three, u'b'maisim tovim. They should have a lot of good deeds that they are involved with. Kifi masha efshar limtzoi, according to what's available to be done. V'gam sheyiyah. Number four, v'gam sheyiyah ben shloishim shana. They should also be at least 30 years old if possible. Why 30 years old? So he explains, because at that point, a person's passion has sort of quieted down of their youth, and which is, by the way, not such a good thing. You should always keep your enthusiasm and excitement, and like we saw, you should always do that. But still, they become a little bit more subdued, which basically means that as life comes, that the way the Eibishter sets up life is that there's challenges. You become more mature. So some people are very worried about getting older and they're very bothered by it. And some people, they get mature. They fall into that role very well. So after 30 years old, a person is more, they have more responsibilities, they have more life experience. There's a certain stature that comes along with it. So that's another quality. Number five, this is quoted from the Alter Rebbe, I believe, where the Alter Rebbe says, "V'toiv sheyiyah adam mufla," should be a distinguished person, which is a little similar to Hagun, but I would say slightly different. That you have someone that when you say, he was the chazan, okay, yeah, it makes sense. He's he's a loud guy, and people don't have a problem with him. But then you have an adam mufla, is like a respected person, a distinguished person, that just almost like by looking at it, people like feel like a certain sense of respect. Okay, it's kind of similar, but a little bit different. And number six, v'gam yehei nosoi. The best way is that this person should be married. Okay, there's different reasons why, but one simple reason is we know the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he did the avodah, he had to be married also. So it could be similar to that, but there's other reasons, I guess. Also, is that ishu beisai, different things like that. 1 second, the yiyulei banim, and he should also have children. Why is that? Because such a person who has these responsibilities, and he's a respected person, and he's older and all, and he has children that he's responsible for. So then, he will pour out his heart, and he's going to implore the Eibishter from the depth of his heart. Now you have to remember, it still applies today, but you have to remember, I was reading a book. It's called The Sheikhet. Maybe some of you heard of it. It's a book that was written. It was a book written about 150 years ago. It was a diary from a guy's name is, I think, Pinya Ber Goldenstein, something like that, who was a Lubavitcher Chassid, apparently, and he lived in the times of the Tzemach Tzedek and a little bit after, or a lot after. He actually met the Rebbe Rasha. He was a Chassid. He went to the Rebbe Marash, I think, and he got a bracha that he didn't listen to, and he, whatever. So the whole story. But anyways, the point is that he describes a regular guy, Kilu, he describes regular life. Life was very, very difficult, very challenging, I should say. People had no money. People died left and right. Crazy. They lived in crazy times. So imagine you have a guy that has kids who's this old. At this age, old. At this age, at 30, they were considered old in those days. And, all their life experience was intense. So imagine you have a guy that Pasha is concerned, where's he going to get money from to feed his family? So imagine you have such a guy who's honorable, he knows Torah, and he has a family responsibility, and he's davening to the Eibishter. This person is going to be taking it very, very seriously. So that is a very good thing. Now, 1 second. So now we have a few things that come out from here. There's a Mishnah Brura that says that look, the fact is that today it's not so pashut, meaning you have everyone that goes up to be chazan, whoever has the loudest voice. So therefore, he explains that ideally it might be better to just have someone that's kavua, and you'll see the Rebbe says very similar based on the Frierdiker Rebbe letter as well. That it might be better just to have someone that's kavua. That might make more sense in today's day and age. Now, there's an interesting halachic, I guess, debate that comes up of what happens if a guy doesn't have all seven. Sometimes you have a guy that's 30, married with kids, and maybe he's respected, but he's not about Torah. Sometimes you have a guy that's about Torah, but he probably can't sing. Maybe he's not married, maybe he doesn't have kids. You can have all different types of things. So over here, you have to sort of think about what's the most important thing. So again, you have from the Mishnah Brura as well, who explains that sometimes if you have to judge what's the best, so he says a Baal Torah, a Gadol B'Torah would be on the top of the list. Someone who's a Yirei Chet, right? Someone that's Yirei Shemayim. Those would come first. Those would be the preference out of this whole list. 1 second. Yeah, you had a question?
So you're saying is why is it always like people that have the best voice in the class, not like the oldest time they just come in?
So right. So there's a very practical thing. I know, for example, my Zaidi was Chazen in 770. In the earlier years, he was Chazen on Yom Kippur. For Mincha, and maybe other things earlier, I don't remember, for sure for Mincha. But later on, when he got old and no one could hear him, so he switched over to becoming much Shabbos Slicha, so they had a mic. You're allowed to have a microphone. So in other words, sometimes it's a practical thing. You're dealing with 770, you could have the most Siddish guy and the most Edel guy, no one's going to hear him. So they get a guy that's also, a wonderful chazan and hopefully a Siddish Yid, but he's a little younger. He's not as sort of a distinguished, but still, you have no choice. So it's kind of that sometimes. Sometimes you just have to balance what your options are. If you had a choice between me and Samach, I would go with Samach because you'll hear him. You won't hear me. Something like that. Yeah. Oh, to the question. Okay. So fine. We'll leave that for now and we'll come back to it soon. Let's go further. Oh, you had a question. Sorry. Yeah.
What if someone's married, a volunteer, he's young, no, doesn't have kids. Is he allowed to be chazan?
Yeah, so these are, as I said a little bit, these are all basically what we call preferences. And sometimes you have to measure. So let's say, for example, you have a guy that's like you said, he's missing one thing. He doesn't have, let's say, kids. So you're worried maybe his davening won't be as sincere. But let's compare that with a guy who's, let's say, who's a very arrogant fellow, who's very wealthy, and he thinks he owns everything, and he's maybe older, but he's respected maybe because he's a big sponsor, but he's not respected as a person. So who would you choose? So it looks like we mentioned, you have to balance what would be better. In that case, you'd go with the guy who's more Siddish, whatever, because he could be more sincere in his tefillos, even if he doesn't have children. Okay, but let's see. You'll see a little bit now the way he explains, and you'll see the next half of this sif, and you'll see what I mean. He continues and he says like this: just like by the chazan, that you have a particular type of chazan that you want it to be, so too you also have for the guy that's going to blow the shofar. Sheyiska shofar b'Rosh Hashanah, the one that's going to blow on Rosh Hashanah, he also should have these qualities that he should look a certain way and be a certain stature. And this is an interesting one. Hamakri, also the person who's makri. Yeah, you know what the makri is? Makri is the guy for us who points with his finger. Yeah. The guy who sits next to the Baal Tekeh points with his finger. We'll come up to these halachas later, but in most shuls, they have someone that sits next to the Baal Tekeh and he goes, Tekiah, right? Teruah. So the guy that does that, right? So we don't do that. We point with our finger. We'll talk about that in Rosh Hashanah when we get there. But the point is, that person is not just for fun. That person is actually supposed to know the halachas as well, because he is supposed to be the one who's going to correct the Baal Tekeh if something goes south. Okay? So the Baal Tekeh, the Baal Tekeh and the Makri, they should also share these qualities that we mentioned as well. Maybe they don't have to have everything exactly the same, but they also should be up to a certain level. Miu, and here answers your question, Avi. Yeah, Miu, Kol Yisrael Ksherim Makol. The truth is that every single yid is kosher for all of these positions. The one thing that's the most important thing is that the people should want him. So sometimes you have a guy that gets up to be chazan and everyone wants to throw things at him and everyone wants to turn away and leave. They don't like him, he's not a good person or whatever it is. That's not going to be okay. He could be missing every single quality as long as the Now, what happens if a guy, and this happens sometimes, one second. Sometimes it does happen. You have a guy that they want him to be a chazan, but he gets up and he realizes that the chazan from 2 years ago is going to be bereg, is going to be upset that he's going. And there's another guy that wanted to be chazan, he's also upset. And he's getting his relatives, and he's getting his relatives, a crew. So now in one show, you have half the people are upset that he's going. So such a thing is happening, and people are starting to become a machlekes. Yimna atzma, you should take yourself away from being a chazan. Even if the chazan will be someone who's not proper, you shouldn't be the one to be the cause of machlekes and all these types of things. Better you should step aside and let someone else go for it. And yeah, what were you going to say?
My question was like, what's considered like loss and how much would you want? Like, that's like a small group of people.
Oh, for the machlekes? I think it depends on the size. What? Oh, how many of the people? There were two different things we said. We said no, so we said like this: that if let's say there's a guy who has a very nice voice, a very sweet. I actually saw this gather. I saw this category that was described in halacha, where it says that it's a guy that will get everyone in the community on board. In other words, they like his davening and he has beautiful tunes. He's a real, and when he davens, people get very inspired. But he himself, it could be he's missing some of these qualities. So everyone wants him. So that would be a good chazan. Even if you can get, let's say, an older Chiddush yid who croaks and no one could listen to him and it's hard. So you'd rather get the guy, as long as the younger guy who doesn't have the same qualities, but when he davens, everyone is inspired. So that's a good thing also. So you have to weigh these things. It's when you're a gabba and you have to choose. Listen, if you go on shluchas, you don't have so much of a choice also. You're trying to get anyone that you could to help you out. So you have to, these are all parts of the equation of how you figure it out. Yeah. Why don't we make a bracha on shofar? We do. You saying during the month of Elul? Okay, so we're not up to Rosh Hashanah. We'll get there soon. But in short, it's a mitzvah. Every mitzvah you make a bracha on. Okay, let's talk about it then. I don't want to get distracted. We are going to talk about it because there's also different nusach of the bracha is also interesting. We do an interesting nusach, so we're going to talk about it when we get there. Okay, sifchas. Yeah, let's see if we could move a little further today and cover some ground. Sifchas, Avil, if you have unfortunately someone who is in a month of Avelus, Kol Shneim Asar Chodesh for the, I'm sorry, in a year of Avelus. So Kol Shneim Asar Chodesh for the whole 12 months, Achar, Avi, V'imai, if he's sitting in Avelus for a parent, Lo Yaleinu, Lo Yehi Shliach Tzibur B'Rosh Hashanah V'Yom Kippurim. Ideally, they should not be a chazan. They also shouldn't be the person who blows shofar on Rosh Hashanah for the community either. Unless there's no one else who's like him. Now, why is that? So the reason is that unfortunately, when a person goes through this type of experience, so what that means is that there's a certain midas hadin that's around them. Okay, whatever that means, they didn't do anything wrong. Obviously, it's the way of the world, the way Hashem made the world. But the fact is that if a person is in their year of Avelos, there's a certain midas hadin that we don't necessarily want to be awakened. Now, if you look in the bottom, there's a little ches. If you look in the bottom, this is a letter from the Rebbe. It's only one line. It's only one line from the letter. But the letter goes like this: that the Rebbe wrote, Levad imu shliach tzibur oibal tekea kavua. The exception to this would be that if this person, the ches in the bottom, the exception to this would be if the person was a Baal Tekeh or a chazan kavua. It means he was set every single year. Yeah. Now, and just I'll explain the background to this letter in a second. But another thing also is that also when there's payment involved, if there's payment involved, then everyone is considered chazaka. In other words, if the community says we want to hire you to be our chazan, that person goes to the top and he's able to be chazan without anything. Now, what was the story in this letter that the Rebbe wrote? So a guy lost. It sounds like he lost a parent. And he wrote to the Rebbe that he was a chazan kavua in a certain place. Maybe it had to do with his parnasa. I'm not sure exactly why he was writing, but he wanted to be able to continue to be chazan, even though it was within the year. And he wrote to the Rebbe what to do. So the Rebbe said that number one, you're the chazan kavua. So according to halacha, if you're the chazan kavua, you could go and be chazan again, right? That's what the quote that they took over here. And then the Rebbe adds another point, and he says, ubefrat, that this question already came up with you a few years ago when your father passed away. Fortunately, and you wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe told you the same thing, that you're allowed to be chazan during that year. So for sure, you're allowed to continue to be chazan. Okay, so there were two separate nakudas, but the point that a person who's a chazan kavua could still be chazan would still apply. Fine. Again, we should never know from such things, but as I get this. Now, continuing along, however, what would be if this person is within 30 days? Yeah, al shar craving, but not from a parent. So again, there's different levels of time in Avelos, and there's also different strictnesses of the types of Avelos depending on for who. So a parent is what is the highest level, the strictest level, and then you have, let's say, Shiva, Shleishim, and a year. Then you also have for other relatives where it's not as strict. So it could be, let's say, Shleishim, which is a stricter time, but it's not for a parent, it's for a different relative, so it's not as strict. So it kind of meets in the middle. Wait, hold on. So the imu shleishim, let's say it would be within shleishim al shar craving for other relatives. So again, it would be very similar. That if he was the muhsik, that he's the one that always does it, either the chazan or the baal tikeh, mutter, he could continue doing it. Why? Because any Yom Tif that comes, it upgrades you, if you will, from that previous level that you were to the next. So if a person was in the middle of Chas v'Shalom of Leilenu Shiva, and it comes to Yom Tif, he finishes Shiva and he goes straight into Shleishim. If a person was Shleishim, then as soon as Yom Tif hits, he finishes with the strictnesses of Shleishim, even if it's way before, and he goes into the 12 months. The 12 months, I think you don't lose that. You stay within that category. So over here, he's saying is that if it's for other relatives, so Shleishim is not as strict, because you already leave it as soon as Yom Tif starts. So therefore, we allow him to be Chazan if he's Kavua. But even in such a case, if the person was not yet muhsik to be chazan, and it's within shleishim of other relatives, and there's also someone else who would be just as good as an option as him, so yesh lahachmir, it would be better to have that person become chazan. And again, as I told you from the letter of the Rebbe, it's possible that if he was kavua before, and especially if he was getting paid, so it's a parnasa, it's very possible that, not very possible, the halacha would be that he could do it anyways. But what happens during the time of slichas? Afilu be'erev Rosh Hashanah, even during erev Rosh Hashanah, which we describe slichas, you also have to choose a certain type of chazan. But in these cases, for the person who's le'aleinu in avelos, mutter l'kol avel liyash le'atzibur, it's not a problem for such a person who's an avel to be chazan, achle b'teich shiva, except for shiva. Shiva itself is its own category. But if it's not Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're not as strict, and the person could go and they could be chazan for that as well. Okay, any other questions on that?
No.
Okay, so that will be it for today.
Thank you.
Are you recording?
I do better.